So welcome to today's lesson where we're going to talk about some of the basics of peritoneal dialysis. Now, many of you may not be so familiar with peritoneal dialysis, and in part that may be because here in America we have a pretty big slant towards hemodialysis, but it may also be due to in part because a lot of our PD patients are commonly seen in the outpatient setting, and so residents and medical students really don't get a chance to interact with them so much unless you do a rotation in nephrology, specifically the outpatient world. So one of the best things we can do to understand peritoneal dialysis is to compare it to hemodialysis. And so we're going to make a table here, talk about the features of hemodialysis and how they compare to peritoneal dialysis. Since most residents and students understand HD really well, we'll try to compare the features from HD to PD. And so let's draw a little line here. And so whatever we accomplish in HD has to be accomplished in PD. And so that's what we're going to try to go over in this lesson right now. The first feature is dialysate composition. So in HD, you have a dialysate with a standard concentration of sodium that you could modify, but within a limited range. You can add any amount of potassium that you want, generally between 0 milliequivalents per liter up to about 4 milliequivalents per liter. You also have some leeway in the amount of calcium that you can add to the dialysate. You have a certain amount of bicarbonate. This is generally fixed. And you can add a certain amount of magnesium. Now, this type of dialysate fluid is what we also see in PD. So we're going to say same as HD, except PD fluid has one additional element that is not seen in HD, and that's dextrose. And we're going to talk about dextrose in the next set of features, which is ultrafiltration. So how do we get water out of a hemodialysis patient? We hook them up to a dialysis machine and we exert a pressure on the filter. And that pressure, called the transmembrane pressure, causes water to move from one compartment, the blood compartment, to the dialysate compartment. Well, in PD, you really can't exert a pressure. You cannot exert an hydrostatic pressure, What you can exert is an osmotic pressure. And that osmotic pressure comes directly from the amount of dextrose that you have in the PD fluid. So we're going to say osmotic pressure. And that is directly related to the amount of dextrose in your solution. The third feature is going to be residual renal function, RRF. Most hemodialysis patients don't have residual renal function, and if they do, they'll lose it as HD progresses, as they spend months on hemodialysis. But for PD patients, residual renal function is very important. You want to have a PD patient produce enough urine so that there is some clearance by the native kidneys, and you'll understand why that is necessary when we go to feature number 4. Efficiency. So how well do we perform dialysis, clearance of solutes, when we're doing HD? Well, we do that pretty well. So we're going to say clearance here, or the efficiency is good. Now, the efficiency of a patient on hemodialysis is generally in the control of the physician. We have another tutorial that talks about the KT over V, which is a quantitative measure of efficiency, and one of those parameters is directly controlled by the physician. But in PD, efficiency is pretty weak. And that's because of the nature of how PD works. It's a slow process. And so you need a little bit of help, and that help comes here in the form of residual renal function. The more residual renal function you have, the less work you have to do on PD, so that in total you're getting good dialysis, efficient dialysis. So that's efficiency, which is related to residual renal function, in which PD depends more heavily than HD. And finally, we're going to squeeze down here the fifth feature, access. So hemodialysis patients need blood access. Whether that's a catheter or a fistula, you need access to the blood, which means that you're going to have all the complications that come from accessing the blood, like stenoses of fistulas, or prolonged bleeding times, or thromboses of grafts, for example. With PD, you don't need any blood access whatsoever, because all you're doing is inserting a catheter into the abdomen and instilling fluid into the peritoneal space. There's no need to access blood. So all of those complications that come with blood access are virtually absent in peritoneal dialysis. So hopefully you have a better understanding of how PD works as we've compared it to HD. And in the next tutorial, we're going to talk about some of the flow processes that are occurring in PD and how we can understand them a little bit better by categorizing them and seeing how each one interplays with the other. Thank you very much.